Hi, and welcome to Close Up with the Hollywood Reporter TV Directors. I'm Rebecca Ford, and I'd like to welcome Deborah Chow, Jonathan Nolan, Janet Mock, Alex Garland, John Chu, and Anna Boden. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We just need to, acknowledge the unprecedented times we're in, between the coronavirus and the outcry about social injustice. It's a really unique time, and I'm curious how this current time is affecting you creatively. As a creator, how do you deal with the weight of what's going on in the world?
Yes, usually this is a moment in which I would be able to gently feel my wife patting my shoulder and saying, shut the fuck up. I think it's a fascinating, terrifying, enthralling moment. I mean, part of what we were doing in the last season of Westworld was kind of telling a story about questioning assumptions about the way society is structured, about the way the world, so many things that we take for granted. And this is a moment in which it's a revelatory moment. It's a moment in which you're realizing that for many people, the world is not what you experience. I think it's a moment to listen, but also a moment to speak up. I mean, I've been kind of fascinated for many years with the structure of our society, the way that it works. And we've talked a little bit about this. We have the luxury in a science fiction show where you get to talk at a certain remove. But I think this is a moment in which you have to listen carefully and question assumptions. I think part of what problem beyond just racism, which there is more of in this country and this world, I think that many of us understood. I think one of the other problems that we're beginning to realize is a certain complacency amongst people who might not think of themselves as racist. A complacency in saying, oh, well, I've done my part. I've done a little bit. And it's clear the little bit is not enough. So it feels like there's a moment here to take stock of the things we're all doing as people and as an industry and say the depth of the problem is much more significant. Right? I think for a lot of people, they imagine the civil rights movement was the end of racism in this country. Right? That's clearly not the case. Clearly not the case in our industry. We congratulate ourselves on our show that we have a good amount of diversity in front of the camera. Do we have enough behind the camera? That's a big problem. So I think it's a moment for everyone to realize that where they thought the incremental things they were doing were enough, it's not enough.
And I think even beyond our jobs too, our own personal lives, talking to our families. So, we all, a lot of us have little children, and explaining to them from the ground up what is happening and what that means. Talking to my parents, talking to my uncles and aunts to help them understand. We were here in West Hollywood when police cars were being burned next to us, but also the protest was around us and that energy, and so we had to talk about all those things, and I think as artists, as we all are, we're very sensitive to where we are as human beings too, and so I think there's so many different places to process of what are we actually capable of doing, what can I be doing, amplifying or doing stuff in my work or beyond that. And so I think it's been a long process of thinking about it, really heavy on I think I'm sure on all our hearts. But I think the power of story and what we do shows how important it is to make the stories that share our experiences with others and share other experiences as well. I just think that really impacted me. That's right. The things that we do are very important to expose people to all this stuff, and also the pandemic itself of allowing us to confront these things trapped in a house with our families, with our friends, with ourselves. I think really forced us as artists to do that, and we're not done. It's just we're literally in the middle. I think that's why Joan and I sort of talk, and it's a lot of stuff because we're processing and we're in the middle of it.
For me, it's interesting because when we first, got shut down on season 3 of Pose, when I was directing the premiere, I was like, okay, good. I can take a breath. I can go home for 3 weeks. We thought it would be a cute little 3 weeks and incubate and do some stuff, finish scripts, polish things off. And then it just got darker and darker and darker. We shoot our show at Silver Cup North in the Bronx, and the Bronx in New York City is literally the epicenter for the United States of the corona crisis. And so we knew that it was the layered nature of these people living in projects, in housing projects, largely Black and brown folk who are not getting attention or care, whose facilities are not being cleaned. And so I felt this stuff coming back up. At first I thought it was like, oh, we're all connected, and this is, and then you see the disparities that happen in certain communities, right? So, the first couple of weeks I felt a deep sense of like creative energy, and then the news headlines were kind of hitting more and more and more about who was being disproportionately impacted by the coronavirus. And I found myself as an artist and a creative not being able to concentrate on the actual work. And I found myself being called to pay more attention to the news, to Twitter, to, as John was saying, amplifying, the organizers on the ground. And of course, George Floyd happens, and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, and Tony McDade, and then of course, Black trans women being killed, and all of this stuff is bubbling up in my various communities. And so I felt called to speak out, of course, as someone who, is seen as a representative of a community in this strange way, as a role model that I didn't ask for, but it's a responsibility and a duty that I must do. And, when I look at the work that I've done on Pose and on Hollywood, oftentimes it's about outsiders looking in, coming in and wanting to change systems, surviving and having resilience despite these systems pushing them down. And so for me, I don't think that it's going to change my work. I think it's just a more urgent call to get to work, and to use the privileges and the access that I do have in the institution of Hollywood to hopefully push for greater change and find more, co-conspirators to jump in and help us do some work on the ground.
I have to admit that, I haven't even begun to understand how this time is really affecting me creatively. I haven't been focusing my energy very much in that area. And mostly, I moved to New York. I was in the middle of a move to New York in March, 9 months pregnant with a 5-year-old. And really the first part of the time was just like trying to figure out how to have a baby during a pandemic, trying to get myself situated in a house where I could really, shelter in place. And it was so kind of inwardly focused. And then, slowly, I think like what Janet was saying, just everything that was going on was becoming so much clearer. And being in New York and really seeing the privilege that I had to, be in a space that was comfortable to live in, even though it was kind of hard to get there, and seeing so many people who I knew having the privilege to flee the city and get out. And you really kind of start to see those contrasts between people with that privilege and people without, and it's all right in front of you, because every time you leave your house, you're walking by people from all walks of life. So I think that for now, it's really been much more about me just trying to figure out how to deal with this period of time as a human being. How am I going to engage with it, be part of it? And it's something that I find myself kind of struggling with every day. How am I going to be a good mom? How am I going to be a good parent right now? How am I going to figure out how to engage with this? And I haven't even really arrived at how to deal with it creatively yet.
Alex, how about for you? I know you're in the UK.
It has affected me creatively quite a lot, I'd say. Initially, partly because I got sick. I got the virus very early on, and it completely knocked me sideways and trashed about 4 weeks. But I didn't have to go to hospital, so it was unpleasant, but it wasn't dangerous. I think when I came out of it and looked around, there were two things, I guess. One was that I could see this was very bad, and it made me unsure of how to write about the world, because was it a world where everyone wore face masks and shops were closed, and the sort of minutiae of sort of textural life. I just didn't know what that would be. And there was also something I thought was quite good. I think there are, it's going to sound perverse to say it, but I think there are positives within this pandemic. And one of them is that it shows up
all of the populist leaders around the globe, Boris Johnson in my country, Trump in yours, Bolsonaro, it just shows what frauds they are. It shows what absolute idiots they are. It's uniquely the populist leaders that have failed to deal with this virus. It's very, very specifically them. And it's because they lie, and their lies don't work against reality. And they've managed to push away reality with their bullshit up to this point, and this has penetrated it. And then you get to the outbreak of absolutely justified civil disobedience, which is different but related in some respects. And with that, the creative effect that had on me was that I was writing about civil disobedience. And the reason I'd been going to Hong Kong last year, checking out the really fantastic popular movement there was over there, protesting against the Chinese government rather than the Hong Kong government, to the extent there's a difference. And I was writing about it because I was really frustrated that I felt there were lots of things that deserved civil disobedience around. One of them being my government and the other one being your government. And that actually civil disobedience was what was required against these people. And not just against these people, but against the superstructures that support these people. And it was really, really bugging me. I was looking back in time and I was thinking about civil rights and Stonewall and anti-Vietnam War demonstrations and AIDS activists, the ACT UP people in New York, particularly in New York in the 80s, and thinking these people knew what civil disobedience was. They knew how to protest. It wasn't a march with an Instagram photo or an angry tweet. It was going out again and again and again and again. So I was writing a thing about the importance of civil disobedience. And then civil disobedience started again. Real civil disobedience. The kind of civil disobedience that's actually needed. So I just instantly stopped writing. I'd written two episodes of an 8-part thing, and I just thought, well, never mind that, because it's already started. So now I'm sort of hunting around for something else to do. But in both instances, I'm kind of pleased. And it's a pleasure that comes out of something very, very dark. Both of these things are very, very sinister and dark. But there's a part of me that takes a grim satisfaction at the response, at the result of showing liars that they're liars and getting people to fight about things they should fight about. So that's where I'm at.
I think for me, it has changed creatively. I was in development on one main project and a couple little ones when we went into COVID. And so we were sort of already developing material. And it felt like kind of when we went through the protests, there's sort of almost before and after with just the perspective on how we look at the material. It's like you kind of come back and it just feels sort of different, the way you're looking at character arcs and stories and themes. And there's just certain things that just feel like, oh, we can't do that anymore, or things are, it just sort of changed the whole perspective on certain things. And it wasn't just me. I think everybody was feeling it that was involved with the project as well. And I think, obviously there's a long road to go and there's a lot more to come with the story on this. But I'm kind of glad for the change, honestly. I feel like, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of pushing to kind of get here. But I'm glad that things feel different, and I welcome it, even if it's been sort of a very difficult way to get there.
I think what we're seeing is, these conversations are starting to bubble up about where does Hollywood go from here? How does this industry change? And it made me realize I have a lot of people who are firsts in this group. Janet, of course, you're known for being the first trans woman of color to be on a major series with Pose, and then also have that major deal with Netflix. John, of course, Crazy Rich Asians was a big first for the industry with its success, and Deborah obviously being a woman who directed a Star Wars series. These are all major landmarks we've seen over the last year. And so I'm curious, for the three of you, what does that weight feel like, knowing that you were the first to do something, and here we are in this next chapter? I mean, are you optimistic that there won't have to be firsts anymore? There can just be plenty? Or how do you sort of carry that weight?
For me, it's, I just don't want to fuck up because I want to make sure that they keep the doors open for other folk to come in so that eventually progress looks like, not me being the first and the only, but then there's tons of folk coming in and being able to tell the stories that they feel are important for them, right? And so for me, I think ever since I've been public with my story from my memoirs until working on Pose in Hollywood, I felt that kind of added labor of carrying people in with me as I'm also just trying to figure out, number one, how to do the work. I didn't go to film school. Next, trusting my intuition and my voice and the things that I know about story. And then also, doing the other thing of like just engaging in content and stories that I want to tell, because I feel at the end of the day, as a creative, that I'm not doing the movement or the people or my communities any service of doing anything that doesn't feel real or authentic or interesting to me. What's called upon for me, I think, in these moments are to do the things that bring me joy, that make me feel like something's resonated or brewing, that excites me. And also at the end of the day too, working in Hollywood and being in the entertainment industry, it's to entertain people. Of course, there's always going to be a message behind it. And I think now, similar to what Deborah was saying, I do feel challenged. I feel an urgency. And I think now with the access that I do have as this sort of kind of, trailblazer in this space, is to hopefully challenge the people that do believe in me to say that because you believe in me, now listen to me as I say that, we need more, people of color on our sets, in the makeup trailer, the gaffs, the grips, the drivers, all of that stuff. And I think that right now it's trying to figure out a way with the institutional access that I have is to try to transform those spaces a little bit so that there's more people in there.
There are moments where you feel the weight, of course, but at the same time, I feel like I just took a giant shower. Like it's just like we didn't create the movement created me. And so this idea that like everyone was out there to like create this wave, and then they're just like, you just have to stand up, you just have to make something and we'll be right there. Reporters such as yourself and others all around the industry, actors who had been training all these years, doing the work, a book that came out at a time, and readers who were open to it, all these things, they had to come together. And so in my mind, I feel very free actually to finally confront the things that are scariest to me. I mean, it's scary to be on the front lines or have people expect that from you when you aren't that person. But at the same time, it's an honor and you have this grand responsibility. I grew up, my family has a restaurant, and my mom and dad always told me, they were in the kitchen and they're in the front. And people in the front, when you're hosting or serving, people who come in think that you're their server, and they treat you like shit sometimes. And I would watch this as a kid, and my dad, and I got very upset when I saw it for the first time. My dad took me aside and said, listen, we're one of the first, came out in 1969, one of the first Chinese restaurants. We're ambassadors here, so we have to like treat them kindly and with love, so when they see another Chinese family, that they will see them as friends and they will see them as equals in that way. Whether that's the right way to teach a child or not, who knows? But for me, it was that responsibility of being an ambassador is in my DNA. So when we made a movie, of course, you're going to have people come after you. You're going to learn a lot of lessons. You're not going to get everything right. That comes with the territory. And I think if I didn't see my parents go through that, I think it would be a lot scarier. So I just feel like very free to help in whatever way to help communicate my experience. And where I used to think maybe there wasn't somebody who could understand that, I realized with the internet, there's so many people out there. So.
And Deborah, for you, I'm so curious about stepping into the Star Wars universe. What ended up being sort of the biggest surprise about becoming a part of that world and the reaction that any move a Star Wars property gets?
I think I underestimated it for sure. I mean, when we were making the series, there were actually a lot of firsts in terms of the directors on Mandalorian, both in terms of gender and race. But when we were making it, we were not overthinking it. Like I wasn't sitting there going, oh my God, I'm going to be the first. And obviously Bryce was with me as well. But it was when it came out that all of a sudden, the show I think came out streaming at midnight, and then I woke up at 7 a.m. and all of a sudden I've got like 27 texts telling me I'm trending on Twitter, which I had never in a million years expected would happen. And it was at that moment you're like, wow, like there really is a responsibility and weight with this. And it's like, moving forward, it's the same thing where you do feel it, because it's not only the responsibility of Star Wars, of trying not to screw up Star Wars, but it's also the responsibility of trying not to be the first woman or Asian who screws up Star Wars. But I think in large part, the only way I can kind of move forward with it is just to focus on the work and just try to make something good, and just sort of be in that position, and hopefully, just that brings change or, whatnot, just by sort of doing the job and having the opportunity to do it.
And Anna, you went from Captain Marvel, which was the first female-centered Marvel movie, to working on Mrs. America, and obviously that's also a story centered on feminists. So I'm curious, were you aware of sort of gravitating towards feminist stories back to back like that?
Honestly, I wasn't. I didn't choose it because that was, I wanted to keep making feminist stories, but it did end up being like I'm kind of working in post on Captain Marvel in a very, very intense period. And I don't want to read anything. Like, I'm not interested in my next project. I just want to take a long nap. And the script came in, and it was like these real life female superheroes, all these people who, I didn't know, I kind of grew up learning about and having so much admiration for, and yet it was told from such a different point of view. I mean, really told through like the anti-feminist Phyllis Schlafly, and it piqued my interest. It made me keep reading, and it didn't hurt that Cate Blanchett was also who's also kind of a female superhero, was involved. Really, I don't think about what I'm going to do next as being part of like a theme of something I'm exploring. It kind of just is whatever I can get passionate enough about to focus the next couple years of my life on, because it's such it's so all-consuming getting into a project, and I can't go part way with it.
Alex and Jonah, both of your projects are so smart, and let the viewers step into these imaginative sci-fi worlds. But I am curious how you think about the viewer. Do you ever worry that they may get lost? Have you ever changed a storyline or something to sort of, help them out if you're a little worried that maybe they won't understand something you're trying to deliver in your stories?
My career began with the presumption, and it's amazing to see how much this industry has changed. I've been here now 20 years. We started with my brother Chris with a movie that, based on a short story I'd written, he adapted it, and it was with Memento. It was backwards and forwards, and it had this kind of Mobius strip construction to it. And the presumption at the time, when we showed the movie, it was financed independently. I had just finished college. I moved out. We thought, shit, Hollywood is easy, right? We turned up. We didn't know anybody. Someone gave us $5 million. You begin to understand as you get older, and you understand the different things that are helping you out along the way. But that part of it, making the film, was actually fairly straightforward. And then the time came to sell it. And I remember we did all these screenings one night. It was 20 years ago. It was March 2000. We screened the film all around town for different distributors. And they all came back and they said the same thing. They said, we loved it. We think it's great. Okay, well, are you going to buy it? No, because the audience won't get it. And you go back to this place of, what the fuck makes you think you're smarter than the audience? The prevailing attitude when I showed up in this town was that the audience was dumb. That there was nothing you could never underestimate the audience. And so we banked our whole career, Chris and myself at the beginning, on the premise that there was an underserved part of the audience who wanted something that was challenging and complex, that the audience wasn't dumb, that in fact the audience was smarter in many cases than what they were being offered. And so from the beginning, we kind of felt like, you have this kind of lean forward version of plotting. And look, fundamentally, I think, the only way that I know how to work is to come from the place of writing the kind of stuff that I would enjoy watching. That has to be your guide. If you start worrying or second guessing yourself too much. But that's the nice thing about the writer's room, and that's the nice thing about television. The collaborative part of it is that you get to gather a really sophisticated group of people together and try it out. And you can feel in the room if it kind of, when you get the confused looks, you know, you've got a little bit of work to do to make sure it's clear.
Alex, how about for you when it comes to devs? I know you were the writer, the director, the creator, you wore all the hats. So how much do you think about the viewer and how much they may or may not understand of what you're presenting?
Not very much. I sort of try sometimes. I try to imagine, will this plot point make sense? Is it clear that this car is on that side of that car, or it sort of some of the sort of mechanical type stuff. But broadly speaking, I think when I'm making something, pretty quickly I just drop into a hole, and then I'm in that hole, and I'm kind of really just working on instinct. And so I think in truth, not really very much. I come from a sort of independent film background, a bit like Jonah, and I wrote it as a spec, basically. I think the issue I've always had with pitches and treatments is that I personally can't tell from a treatment whether it will work as a script, and so it's actually much easier for me to write it as a script, and they don't all get made. Sometimes people don't want to make them. That's the breaks. So yeah, there was no pitch. There was a script, and then you've got a good creative position because people aren't there for notes. You're really saying, do you want to make it or not? So
What's the most heartbreaking one that didn't get made? You don't have to tell us the premise, but
the most heartbreaking ones are some of the ones that did get made.
Fair enough.
I'd much rather have a bad script not get made than a bad script made. But that would be kissing and telling. So.
John, with Home Before Dark, I read that you were finishing up Crazy Rich Asians and you were looking for something meaningful to do next. Can you tell me what about that project you felt was meaningful and drew you to it?
Crazy Rich Asians changed my whole perspective of what kind of stories, when you make a movie like that and that energy on set of everyone having a higher purpose, it's hard to go back. And so when we're talking about TV, and I had not really done TV before, my friend Dana Fox came to me and Joy Gorman from Anonymous, and they said, you just had a daughter, because I had a little girl 2 weeks after shooting Crazy Rich Asians. And she's like, we have this story about a father-daughter journalist of journalist family, basically. And I remember hearing Hildy Lysiak's story of this 9-year-old who broke a story in her hometown. And I remember seeing her YouTube videos of people having all these bad comments on her. And rather than sort of shrink back, she made a video where she read all the bad comments out loud, and that had stuck with me for years. And so when they brought that up, that they got the rights to that, and that this was not going to be a kids show, this was for the whole family, but it was going to she was going to be the main role, and that we could treat this little girl as seriously as any hero in any superhero movie. That was very exciting for me. The idea of the search for truth is the thing that really got me. This idea that the scariest thing in this was not going to be some monster under the bed. This was going to be the stuff that we sweep under the rug, and confronting that stuff. It was a portrait of a family, and how important journalism is. And even from a little girl, what you pour into your kids is a reflection of what you hope to be, and they spit it right back at you like a mirror. And so I just loved all those dynamics, that it was this pulpy, fun mystery, but at the same time had a message of journalism, the importance of journalism, and then and a family, understanding family. So that's really what drew it to me. And then to be able to work with Apple Plus, they were in their infancy, so it was fun to just like get on that. I grew up in Cupertino near Apple, so it was fun to sort of come home and work on that with them.
And Janet, you have so much work you've done over the last year, but I'm especially curious about Hollywood, because it does explore, if different diverse people had really gotten to have more moments in this industry. Can you tell me about what about that project, what it felt like to sort of explore the what ifs if old Hollywood had been that different?
Well, I've always been, fascinated with 1940s kind of star-making machine of the studio system. And the films at that time period were kind of like building blocks for me in my own kind of, my obsession with glamour and, the way that people move their bodies and a lot of the things that you kind of see in my work. And, there's always a piece of me, as a Black trans child growing up in America, looking at those images and not necessarily seeing yourself. And then when you do see like a little spark of yourself, like Alina Horn flutters on screen for one scene to sing, a number and then is cut in the South because they don't want to see a Black woman on screen, those kind of things are what kind of pushed me to want to work on Hollywood with Ryan and Ian. And so I think that the revisionist history of it was interesting to me as a fan of that time period, and really thinking about these conversations about, how the gatekeepers are able to make the decisions that they do, why they continue to make the same films over and over and over again, why they put the same stars in over and over and over again, why they say certain things don't work when they never tried before, and then when things do work, it's a fluke. And so for us, the challenge when I came into the room, they had written 3 episodes already, and it was very much like a sex romp about the gas station and kind of that seedy world, and then you're going into the studio system world. And I had made a pitch to Ryan. I said, what if, the one colored girl on contract ends up fighting for a screen test and she gets the role? How does that change everything? How do the people outside the studio system react? How do, say, like the KKK, in episode 6, I had to do cross burnings, which were its own magnificent thing because the imagery of it was so powerful. But as we were sitting there, talking about the mechanics of it all, I'm like, oh, wow, we're really burning crosses on 3 lawns, in Hancock Park. And it was like this weird kind of thing. And so for me, that kind of was the interesting part about working on Hollywood was being able to make those little twists. And like, if you say, what if we cast the Black girl, what happens then? And everything kind of shifted in the series for the last basically 5 episodes because of that one little pitch.
And this is pretty unusual for a director's roundtable, but we have 2 directors who worked together on Devs. Janet, you had an acting role on the show, which I think is so fun. Can you guys tell me about how that came about and what you may have learned from working together in that respect?
It was obviously, I was a fan and admirer of Alex's work. And so when Carmen Cuba, the casting director and producer, I believe, on Mrs. America, asked me to read for the role of Senator, I was just like, it says she's 50-something years old. Like, what? I had never acted before, but she's kind of been obsessed with this thing. And then she said Alex Garland, and I was like, oh my God. And so for me, I took it as, I had just shot, I think only had done 2 episodes at that point of directing. And I was like, this would be a great experiment for me to see what it feels like to be an actor on a set. And the not knowing of it all and the lack of control in a sense, and just the trust you have to give, to the process. And, what was so great is that Alex had written and directed all 8. He knew exactly the moments that he needed, and it was easy to just trust the process. But at the same time, I left with a huge appreciation for actors and what they do and the bravery of just like, you do it on the day and then it just disappears and it comes back and it's like this beautiful thing. You're like, oh my God, did I do that well? It's like, yeah.
Had you ever acted before?
No.
Alex, so what was it like for you to know you had another director on set, watching your work?
It was good fun. The thing about work is that on the one hand you're constructing a TV show or a movie or whatever it is, and there's something kind of grand about that in some respects. But in other ways you're really like a bunch of people standing around a hole in the road trying to figure out how to fill it, and there's a lot of it's all very practical. On the day, on set, it's really quite practical and straightforward, and it's quite fun having unexpected aspects like director acting. That's a good thing. It sort of brightens up the day, I guess. What I didn't know was whether I felt very confident about Janet, and part of that comes from my confidence in Carmen Cuba, I suppose, as well. But I felt confident. What I didn't know was, what will the very first moment be like, you know? Because I'd never do that. I'd never stand in front of a camera and read lines, never. And so there's a sort of suspended, like, held breath beat of, is Janet actually going to be able to do this? And then she just did, and then it's just good fun, you know. It was good. I really enjoyed it.
And Deborah, you had a small role in The Mandalorian. Tell me, was that just a fun little appearance? How did that come about?
That started as a joke that I don't think I ever thought was actually going to happen. And it was supposed to just be a cameo with no lines at all. So it's developed a life of its own. But yeah, the three of us decided to do it, and when on the day of shooting, John Favreau was watching, and he basically just started throwing us lines as we were sitting there. And then all of a sudden we're all like, no, we don't want to join SAG. We don't want lines. I wouldn't say, I don't know. I think for Rick and I, neither of us have even been able to watch it. It's that horrifying for us. I definitely do not want to be an actor, but.
Well, let's talk about that relationship with actors, because obviously it's so key to your work. What would you say makes that collaboration, it's just as easy as it can be?
Trust.
Trust?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you have to build that with every step, every moment. You have to make it clear that you've created a safe space, and in exchange you get to a different place. You can ask. I mean, I'm not 100% sure, frankly, that my presence on set makes any damn difference at all. We have this on Westworld. We have one of the most ridiculously talented casts I could imagine, and so not really. I'd flatter myself by imagining that anything gets better when I show up on set, but I think part of what Lisa and I did from the beginning on that show was create a place in which, and part of that is how you design your set and who you allow to be on your set and the rules that you build. Just making sure that people, that these incredibly talented people who you've asked to reveal pieces of themselves feel safe to do so. That they feel that they can trust you.
I love creating that process with my actors for Home Before Dark, specifically with Brooklyn Prince, who's 9 years old, 8 actually when I shot with her, which is pretty amazing for an 8-year-old to carry a show, and she wouldn't just say lines, she really had to understand it, and I don't know the perspective of an 8-year-old little girl, and so we would have a lot of conversations with me and her, without her parents, just about what does this mean? What does this word mean? What does this moment mean? Jim Sturgis, who plays her father, and Adam Miller, her mother, we'd have these family meetings just in the fake kitchen there, talking about how Brooklyn felt about being bullied, or how Hildy would feel. Sometimes we even call Hildy herself and talk to her. And I think that to have an actor that understands that perspective, and wants, Brooklyn would say often, I just want to make Hildy proud. I want to know how she felt there to present that properly. And so when she takes it seriously, we take her seriously, and it's just I love finding that everybody's currency and finding the process where we can all work on this canvas together.
Anna, how about for you? What makes the best actor-director collaboration for you?
Part of it, I think, is just chemical. And there are certain people who really, you just start talking the same language right away. But it reminds me of one of the really early things I learned from an actor on our first movies. It's you spend so long, especially as an independent director, when you're writing something on spec and you're trying to get it sold and you're trying to cast it and you're trying to put it together, and you've created this entire world in your head, and you feel like you know every minutia of how everything should be, and then you start inviting people into the process. And one of the first things I learned from my actors was, it was an argument about what the facial hair of one of the characters should be. And I had this idea, I knew how it was going to be. I had imagined it a million times, and the facial hair should be this way. And then the actor had a different idea and said, when I look in the mirror, I feel like the character. And it really, like, I think about that all the time, because whatever, this person comes in and they're bringing this whole new life to it, and it becomes this whole new collaboration, and whatever you can do as a director to help them feel most like the character, so they're going to give their best performance. And that's kind of, what Ryan and I try to do. I haven't mentioned Ryan yet, but he's my co-director who I always work with, and really trying to create that space where we're opening up our thing that we've had that's just ours, and really inviting actors into it and trying to create a space where they, like you said, trust. Just feel like they can try a million things and fail, and and it's like a safe space to do that.
What do you do if you are not able to sort of collaborate well with an actor? I'm sure some of you have had this experience over the years. How do you get past that and work through something like that?
You just kill off the character. No, you gotta work through it. I mean, you gotta, the TV's changing, but TV is like a marriage, right? A film's like a fling, but TV is like a marriage. You're gonna make it work with your core cast. You've got to figure it out very quickly, and if it's not working, you need to sit down and really talk it through and figure it out.
Unless it happens at the table read, in which case.
Recast.
Yeah.
For me, my only experience has always been as first in the writer's room and then going to shoot the scripts that I write. And so I think that what Jonah said a little earlier about the trust of the process, I think that what most of the actors on the 2 shows that I've been on, what they call for me is that I have a command of story and I know what I'm looking for. And then that way they can show up and do new things and try new things. I don't think I've ever had anyone yet just kind of give me what they want to give. Some of the more veteran actors will kind of have that, this is what I'm going to do and I'm not going to shift from that. And I think oftentimes you have to then go in and have a little, a little powwow, usually in rehearsal, or, take a little bit of a break and explain the process of like where we're going. For art, for Pose, and for Hollywood, as we were shooting, we didn't have all the scripts out yet. And so I could use that oftentimes to say, well, your character's going here and da-da-da-da-da. And so you can talk things through to like justify sometimes specifically why I need. And most times it just comes from a process of like them knowing that I'm actually watching every little thing that they're doing and I'm intentional about the direction that I'm giving and I don't over talk anything. But yeah, some days you have difficult actors who don't show up on time, who don't do this or don't do that. And slowly but surely, as Jonah said, they kind of get written down and down and down because they're not as dependable. It's simple.
It's Darwinian.
But sometimes that tension is great. That energy shows up on screen. And so like some of my most difficult actors, like, and we could say difficult, but like sometimes it's just perfectionist or trying to understand something that I don't necessarily understand. And so I love fighting through that because energy is energy. And when that camera turns on, you feel it, and they're trying and they're pushing and you're pushing. It's like there's something that it creates there.
I wish I could get to that place, the sort of Werner Herzog, Klaus Kinski, I'm going to stand behind the camera with a rifle pointing at the actor's place, but I don't think I'm capable of it. I honestly find directing so difficult that when people kind of can't get out of their own space, I mean, it's, as Alex said, you're all out there often literally by the side of the road, looking at a hole in the ground. It's a lovely metaphor. And you sort of feel they're the folks who sort of appreciate how difficult everyone's job is on set and just try to show up. And I've been really, really lucky in working with generous actors and grown-ups.
Deborah, I do want to hear about, stepping into Mandalorian, of course, there were multiple directors on this project, and I'm curious how that affects the way you worked on your episodes. How much are you thinking about what came before and what came after your specific episodes?
It was an interesting experience because it was like nothing I'd ever done in television before. Just because the process was completely different, because we were in there so early. I was there 2.5 months ahead, and we prevised everything going in because obviously we're doing the volume technology, so we had to do the previs for it. As a result, what was really interesting about it was that all the directors got to really know each other because we'd all be doing previs or, prep at different times. So as opposed to like sort of regular TV or traditional TV where you kind of maybe just overlap a little bit with somebody and sort of ships passing in the night, we really got to know each other, and we actually started, I think, in a lot of ways, leaning on each other and sort of collaborating to sort of figure out, okay, like, movement, like how is the character, how are we defining this character by movement? So it was an interesting process because it was almost like a team, which I have never been part of in such a way, trying to find the first season. And we also didn't shoot in order. So everything was sort of shot out of order. It didn't go sort of one and carry on. So it was an interesting process where I think we really learned from each other, and we all sort of developed the language together.
I know you're working on the Obi-Wan series, which you'll be directing throughout. How different will that be, sort of being in charge of it all?
It's definitely going to be different, just in terms of the sheer workload, obviously, of doing the whole thing. But in some ways, in some ways I'm going to miss having a team, honestly, and having people that are there to sort of bounce ideas off of. But then obviously the flip side is it is nice to kind of have like a coherent voice and know sort of what you're doing from beginning to end and be thinking about the whole thing as one.
So you have to previs every shot in the volume, can you riff on the day?
To an extent. I mean, you do have to previs because basically they're going out to get they're doing the photogrammetry and they're building the environment. So you need a fair lead time, like of several weeks, in order for them to have that content ready on the screen. So once you have it on the screen, then you could riff to a certain extent. You could, within the environment, you could change the blocking somewhat or, change the angles, but you can't change what's on the screen, so that's what you're having to commit to early on.
And Alex, tell me about how you work with your actors, sort of helping them prepare to step into the world you've created. Do you suggest books or films, or do you just have talks with them? How do you sort of get them prepared for those roles that they're taking on?
It really depends on the actor. There are some actors who really just want to turn up and do it, and too much discussion beforehand would make them anxious. And there's others who find their comfort in the space by talking and swapping books or articles or YouTube videos or going on research trips to talk to whoever is relevant for their role or whatever. So I really just try and do what the actor needs. The only requirement I do, or the only requirement I ask for, is that everybody agrees to rehearsal for all the principal members of cast. Sorry, Janet, wasn't you on this one? We blocked out 2 weeks before principal photography, and then we shot in blocks. So we'd keep doing a rehearsal period before all the blocks, and that also came from having worked on film. I know not everyone rehearses. I simply don't understand why they don't. It's only upside, as far as I can tell. There's a lot of questions that might get asked on set and slow the day down that get dealt with if you rehearse properly. So it's not to kill the performance. It's for everyone to agree. Know why a line exists. Know why this character feels that about that character. So, but aside from rehearsals, I'm completely malleable according to whatever the actor wants.
Do any of the rest of you believe as strongly in rehearsals, or maybe not hold as much value to them?
For me, rehearsals are that safe space where we truly get to talk about the material. Oftentimes we don't have time in our schedules to be able to do it beyond on the day. So we do it before we set up cameras, and I get to discuss my thoughts around blocking, where I kind of want people at, how I want to see them move. We get to, I get to have their feedback on what they believe or what they felt that their character would be doing, specifically like on a show like Pose, where, now we're in our 3rd season. They have very clear opinions about, what they want for their characters. And so we have to have that space, I agree with Alex, to be able to discuss that stuff and suss it out before the cameras go up, and then you have 100 other people around you watching. And so I think in those private rehearsals, for me, it's essential to be able to complete a day and get what I need.
I 100% agree. Ryan and I really have always done rehearsals, and sometimes that rehearsal isn't necessarily blocking out a scene. It depends what the scene requires. If there isn't a lot of blocking in a scene, then you don't need to, you have a certain kind of actor who doesn't like to kill it in that way, or mark it out in that way, but at least like reading through the script and talking about character and story, and getting some of those conversations out so that you're just closer to being able to delve into it in a more rich way when you're on set. We always love to do that on our movies, and I do think that sometimes it does, particularly on television, feel like something that you don't always get to do, or don't always get to do in as thorough a way. On Mrs. America, our first 2 episodes, we had a lot of time with the actors, and particularly with Kate Blanchett and John Slattery, who play a couple in the series. We had a lot of time with them, and we actually went to the location and used the space and talked through some of the scenes, and it was setting up their characters and setting up their dynamic, and it was so helpful. We didn't always have that by the time we got to the finale episode, and I did miss that time, but you deal with it, and we made it work. But and part of that was just the learning experience of working on television, where we're used to having the script. I don't know how you worked, Alex, because you wrote and directed all the episodes, but we didn't have the script for episode 9, while we were shooting episode 1 and 2. And so that was a real learning curve for us in terms of how things are getting written as you go in television. Did you write everything before you started shooting, Deb?
Yeah. So yeah, because it's a limited, what do you call it? Limited series. Series, yeah. Yeah, so I just, apart from anything, I couldn't have been writing, and also that sort of rolling state of writing just wouldn't have been possible. But anyway, I couldn't have done it. I sort of need to know what the ending is, I guess. But I do understand that other process, and it interests me. It sounds scary in a sort of good way, a sort of like, take the parachute jump, and you're not exactly sure, did anyone strap it on, and you'll find out about halfway down, and there's something kind of exciting about that, I guess, if you've got a death wish anyway. And but no, I took the cautious route. I took the sort of the safe option.
I'm going to write down some of your metaphors because I like them a lot.
Well, what's so interesting about the latter process is that you talking about the collaborative nature of television, and specifically in series where you have different arcs over various series, you have to retool sometimes based on how an actor shows up or their strengths. And so you'll notice something like very early on, we didn't know that Billy Porter would step up and be a lead on Pose. We didn't know that until we saw him on stage corralling this crew of 300 background actors, and it's just like, wow, there's a presence here that is so much bigger than him just standing behind the microphone podium. We then we made Pray Tell an even bigger character, and it's all because of how they showed up. So we had the first 2 scripts written, and we had drafts of the next 3 episodes, and then we went back and retooled after the pilot, and we gave Billy so many more scenes with Blanca, which became kind of the heart of the show. And so similar, we had that on Hollywood as well, that you get to kind of see how they are in the pilot, and you sit there and you watch, and you're just like, oh wait, there's something here. Like the Rock Hudson character is actually comedic, and he's funny, he's a little goofy. It's like, let's write more to that. And so we retooled things for the later scripts based on those strengths that the actors come up with or have innately.
So I do want to ask you all about going back onto set and into production. Things are starting to move in that direction, and obviously as the directors, you are the leaders on set. How are you feeling about the idea of production starting up again, and what do you feel like will have to change for that to work for you?
I'll jump in. I'm feeling very apprehensive about it. You do feel, I think, in television, be the director, but also the executive producer. I mean, you feel very responsible for your crew, feel responsible for them right now, because all crews plan for a month or two of not working, right? We're showbiz folks. This is how it works. Nobody plans for, I think, with the sort of big productions that, the big on location stuff that all of us shoot, it's going to take a long time to figure out how to do those again and how to do them safely. We had a relatively minor illness, Westworld season 3, and it was a massive amount of money that went into that. It's hugely disruptive. So if you consider a disease that that incubates for 14 to 18 days, that people can be asymptomatic and we still know so little about this. So on a level, feeling concerned, feeling worried about your crew's physical safety, I think we have a lot left to figure out for these big productions. There's certain things that can go back into production.
Yeah, and I think if we were, as directors, you are responsible for these people. And like, we were finishing In the Heights, we were in the mix, and I knew as soon as schools, and we were going, like we had a deadline, and as soon as schools were shut down and kids, like our mixers, our sound editors, their kids were coming home, and I could see in their face that they didn't, of course they're going to work, of course they're going to finish our movie, but I can feel in them that they have kids coming home and they don't know what to do with them, and so there is a responsibility in our roles to protect them. And when the government's not necessarily doing it, then we have to take it upon ourselves. I think that I've never really felt that responsibility until this time, really being like, I need to fight with the studio, whoever's paying for this, because I know they want to move forward, but like we have to protect our crew who's sitting here in pain because they don't know, they're going to fight for our movie, but like they're in a tough situation. So I think all those things, if someone were to get it, if someone's parents or kids get it, like I don't want that on my shoulders either. So there's a lot of questions of what to do. I think there's also like, what kind of production, what are the stories that you can actually do and maybe do, and I'm not sure I feel that comfortable just for to protect my own family, really.
I have a 2-month-old at home, so I've been just extremely conservative about this whole thing in my own personal life, and so I just totally agree with everything you guys just said about, feeling a lot of concern about what that looks like, and making sure that maybe there's like a resort movie that we could all make where like everything's shot in the resort. It's a great film and everyone can bring their families and we all quarantine together on the resort and we just shoot everything in the resort and eat the resort food. I don't know, but that's not something that I'm really seriously thinking about,
There is just one thing. I understand the apprehension, and of course it's correct to have apprehension, and I've got it too. But at the same time, I don't know if we can all sit around saying a vaccine's going to turn up. And we do work in an industry, and the people that we're talking about protecting, there's other ways they need protecting as well as their physical health, which is economically. And they need to work. And so we do have to find a way to get back on set, to get productions going. And whether that is like the day works a lot slower, possibly. So it's like, you do the lighting and then everyone steps back and then the grips come in and sort out the dolly, or like however it's done, the sort of circus all moving together, the circus starts to splinter up. Maybe it's something like that, I don't know. But what I really feel is I'm getting to the point where I want to start figuring out how to get on with it, because it's the only thing I've maybe ever agreed with Donald Trump about, which is that some of the economic consequences become quite serious in themselves. If people aren't earning, if people don't have money, recessions kill people just the same way viruses do, and so. I'm definitely going to stop saying that, because I can feel like I'm breaking out in hives, finding myself in a point of agreement with him. But I do think we need to get back to work. I really, really do feel that strongly. And so I spend quite a lot of time thinking about the practical aspects of it, about how to actually get on a set, how to make it function sort of reasonably safely. I don't think we're going to be able to say nobody's going to get COVID. That seems impossible. So we have to go into it in a certain kind of way and like do the best we can. But we do need to get on with it.
Do you think that's smaller crews? Like, I mean, is that going back to a way of working that that maybe we kind of started out with, you know, small indie films?
I think that indie model where it's quite guerrilla, it's quite stripped back, but at the same time you can get a tracking shot. You know, it doesn't mean everything has to be handheld with one key light. It gives a lot of flexibility, but and maybe that's the baby steps before we get back into the kind of big movies that, you know, like you guys know how to make. I've never worked on a thing like that, but I kind of I just feel I'm sort of like straining at the leash a bit. You know,
I think there's two parts to it, right? Someone used the metaphor for me with regards to the American economy in the face of this crisis. It's like a car that's built, it's like a dragster. It's built to go 400 miles an hour. It's got no fucking seatbelts. So if we hit the first bump, everyone dies, right? There is no structure in our country for supporting people in a moment like this. And I think the other thing we need to think of, we need to think of ways to get back to work. It's very important. But we also need to look at our industry and figure out, okay, look, everyone's accustomed to you work for a few months and then you take a few weeks off, a few months, maybe the job comes, maybe it doesn't. I mean, in many ways, Hollywood people are kind of adapted to this world, right? This is how we live. We do some work, we stop, the work dries up for a bit, you go back to work. But is that really how it should be? So we've been working with the Motion Picture and Television Fund, which is a tremendous organization, in terms of making sure that there's a little bit more of a backstop for our crew members and making sure, look, the reality is, no, we're not going to wait necessarily for a vaccine, right? But we will wait to figure out the appropriate responsible methodologies where you can, now you're not going to be able to guarantee no one gets sick, but you have to get to a place where you feel good about inviting your family back on the set and you feel like you're not going to become, you know, the reason. And so you need resources in place. We need to figure out methodologies for being able to shoot, but we also need to figure out, take a hard look at our business and say, is this the way it should be? Where people are paid for a certain amount of work and then discarded? Or, you know, is there more work that we could be doing to make sure that our industry, like other industries, when things shut down, because this isn't the last time this is going to happen, that the resources are there to make sure that, you know, that things don't get too disparate for people in our business.
Jonah, I did want to ask you about season 3 of Westworld and directing, because I know you didn't direct in season 2, but you decided to take on this episode in season 3. What was it about this one that you had to do yourself?
Every time I direct, I'm taking a slot away from someone else who could be bringing something different to it. So season 2, and Lisa and I run the show together. Lisa directed in the second season and did an amazing episode, and now went off to make a movie. She's gotten very fancy very quickly. I stuck around, and on season 3, it really felt like, look, we're reinventing the grammar of the show completely. We're going from, this is one of the things we were excited about with the show, is that in every season, it could subtly shift genre. So we had been shooting a Western, and for this season, we needed to really take a look. And from the beginning, Lisa and I struggled with, okay, well, how is this going to work? What's it going to look like? How do you do it on a TV schedule and budget? Luckily, we have one of the most fantastically talented crews that I've ever worked with, incredibly imaginative. But I really felt like it wouldn't be fair. I felt like I needed to be the guinea pig. I had a vision, you're threading the needle here in terms of, visions of the future. Blade Runner has kind of dominated the space for so long. You're asking someone to invent a visual language. Near future, I think, is actually in many ways, kind of the tallest order. Far future, you can get out there and you can kind of create from whole cloth. Near future, you need to come up with something that also rings true for an audience. So I felt like, look, I'll have a lot of ideas, and I really didn't want to put anyone in the position of if I figured if we screwed it up, it would be my fault, and I would have only myself to blame. And in truth, I just love working with our cast and crew. So it was a lot of fun to be back in the director's seat.
So guys, we're gonna end this with one lighter question I'm gonna have you all answer. And the question is, if there was one director, alive or dead, you could sit down with and pick his or her brain about their work, who would you pick? And what do you want to know?
Fuck. Holy fucking shit.
Yeah.
That's a big question.
That's such an unfair question.
Did you say alive or dead?
Alive or dead?
Well, I'm just gonna say a name, right? Because it's a long list, okay? But just because I've been watching his stuff recently, rewatching, I was going to say Nick Rogue. Walkabout, Don't Look Now, Man Who Fell to Earth. Because there's decisions that get made within those films that are absolutely fascinating, and I would like to know how those decisions got made. So I'd say Nick Rogue. But I could say Peter Weir as well, because I rewatched Picnic at Hanging Rock the other day, and that is a very, very interesting movie. But anyway, I said Nick Rogue, so I'm going to stay with Nick Rogue.
To be honest, one of those people would be Alex Garland, for sure. I love his movies. I love his brain. I would want to.
Thanks, John.
I would love to talk about the future with him. No joke. That's like.
Thank you. That's very kind.
The details of the future. These are the things that like I stay up at night thinking about. I don't make movies about them yet because I just don't feel smart enough. So when I watch your movies, I see such honesty in technology and humanity, and I just think that that's such a beautiful thing, because I think it's something it's such a thing we're all gonna be having to confront very soon, if not already. And I just think you have a view of it, a perspective that's so fascinating and interesting, and that we're all gonna have to engage in that conversation sooner rather than later.
Well, I'm definitely blushing, John. Thank you very much.
For some reason, the first name that popped up was Nora Ephron and George Cukor. And I think because they, both of them were kind of dismissed for doing women's pictures. And there's something about, specifically for Nora, there is a clear kind of, parallel in our careers. She started off as a journalist and then started writing about her life. And then she wrote a screenplay for Hollywood, and then she got to write and direct. And so just wanting to just sit with her over a meal that she cooks and ask her about everything, including what I should wear and what doctor I should go to. But then also like how she did it, what made her jump in, how did she learn, what did she learn, how did she get better, those kinds of questions.
I'd say Kurosawa. I would love to sit down with him. I'd have a lot of questions. And I think the biggest question is just that how he managed to make things so powerful with such sort of seemingly simple stories, and just kind of learn from that.
The first name, I'm just going to say the first name that popped into my mind, because there were a lot of names right afterwards, which was Robert Altman. I think he was one of the first filmmakers I watched, when I started around when I was a teenager, started watching movies and just really feeling like, oh my God, I could just fall into these characters, and the way that he kind of is able to explore character and have this kind of light naturalistic touch. But I don't know, I'd love to spend a day with him.
I was going to say Kurosawa. So Deborah, you blew me up. But it's true. I don't really understand. I go back to his films and watch them again, and we try to do, we did samurai episodes in the second season of Westworld, which is one of the most enjoyable experiences as a producer I've gotten to participate in. I look back at those productions and I don't understand how he did them. Just extraordinary. In those days when you didn't have the luxury of fixing it in post, just the ambition, the scale, the largesse, but also the small human beauty that he smuggled into every frame. Incredible.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us again. I know this was an unusual way to do this in this virtual setting, but I thought the conversation was wonderful.
Thanks, guys.
Absolute
Thank you,
pleasure,
guys.
all of you guys.
Bye.